You're 12 years old in Muharraq when your father sells your summer before it begins. Not your future, not your house, just your summer. That's how debt talks when it wants to sound temporary. The pearl merchant sits cross-legged in the shade, writing figures in a ledger, while your father keeps his eyes on the floor. Flour on credit, rice on credit, cloth on credit. Last season's bag catch still unpaid. The merchant does not raise his voice. Men like him don't need to. He only taps the page once and says a thing that will drown your childhood more efficiently than seawater ever could. The boy can go this season. Your father nods. That's all. No argument. No bargaining. No illusion. That's your first lesson in Bahrain. Before the stone is tied to your foot, the debt is tied to your name. By dawn, you are at the harbor. Dowhoes, ropes, sails, shouting, salt already in the air before the sea has earned it. Muharraq was the center of Bahrain's pearling world. For centuries, the island economy revolved around the annual dives. And by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Bahrain stood at the heart of the Gulf trade, with the largest fleet in the region and merchant quarters built from pearl wealth. You do not see heritage. You see men checking ropes, boys carrying water skins, and your father avoiding your eyes because the captain is already watching. The captain, the Nakuda, he owns the boat's authority, if not always the boat itself. Behind him stands a merchant, the Tadger, who finances the season and waits on shore to profit from lungs he will never have to empty underwater himself. And that's how it begins. Your life as a pearl diver in Bahrain. You're not a diver yet. Not fully. First you are a hauler, a seeb, the boy who stays on the dhow, hauling men back up before the sea keeps them. That sounds easier until you realize your hands are all that stand between another man and the bottom. The real divers were almost nothing. A nose clip, leather finger guards, a basket at the neck for oysters, a stone weight tied to the foot to drop fast, then the plunge, down into green pressure and silence with only rope, lungs, and luck between them and death. You watch the first diver vanish over the side and wait for the rope signal. Too early and you waste his chance. Too late and you bring up a corpse. The Gulf is calm that morning. That makes it worse. A smooth sea gives you no one to blame. The day does not break into hours. It breaks into dives. Down, wait, pull, sort, again. Down, wait, pull, sort, again. By noon, your palms are torn open where the wet rope burns through skin. By evening, your shoulders feel like they belong to a much older boy. The men joke between dives because men always joke when the alternative is admitting their bodies are rented. One of them spits over the rail and says, "The sea eats who it likes." Another answers, "No, the debt eats first." That one gets no laugh because everyone on the boat knows it's true. The structure of pearling tied captains, crews, and merchants through financing, shares, and advances. In practice, many divers and crew remain trapped in chronic debt to captains and merchants, serious enough that later reforms were explicitly designed to reduce what officials described as debt slavery. At 13, you make your first dive, not because you are ready, because a man on the boat coughs blood into his hand, and the Nakuda says the season cannot afford weakness. They clip your nose, tie the basket around your neck, fasten the stone to your foot. The diver beside you says, "Don't panic on the way down. Panic belongs to the men on deck. Down there, it only belongs to the fish." Then you step to the edge and jump. The sea closes over your head like a hand. There is no poetry in the first descent, only pressure. Your ears scream. The light above turns thin and far away. The bottom arrives too fast. You claw oysters loose with your fingers, shove them into the basket, and tug the signal line with the chest already burning. When they pull you up, you vomit seawater over the side, and the men laugh. Not cruelly. Relieved. You are useful now. That is what passes for celebration in hard economies. The season stretches on. Summer is not a childhood anymore. It is a floating factory. The dhow leaves from Bahrain and the purling coast and moves between beds while the whole island economy waits on what the sea gives back. Purling was not just divers and boats. It sustained merchants, captains, rope makers, timber sellers, cooks, agents, warehouses, and whole neighborhoods of Muharraq built on the gamble that enough oysters will hide enough value. From shore, pearls look like elegance. On the boat, they look like swollen fingers, split lips, sun-mad eyes, infected cuts, and men sleeping through pain because dawn will ring the same bell tomorrow. That is another lesson. Luxury always has a basement. At 14, you stop being afraid of drowning. That should comfort you. It doesn't, because fear has not left. It has only changed shape. Now you fear a weak haul, a bad market, a dishonest tally, a season that ends with no pearl big enough to matter, and the same debt waiting on shore, older and hungrier. One evening, the Nakuda reads out shares after expenses. Boat share, captain's share, merchant's claim, crew portions. By the time the numbers reach your father, they look like an insult written in arithmetic. He says nothing. Later, in the dark, he tells you, a good season feeds a man. A bad one belongs to the merchant. You ask which kind this was. He answers, the kind that comes again. At 15, a diver doesn't come back up in time. You feel the rope jerk once. Then nothing. The boat goes still. Even the waves seem to wait. The Nakuda shouts. Manhaul. The line comes up heavy, wrong, dragging more silence than body should. When they get him over the side, his nose clip is gone, one eye is red with blood, and his lips are blue in a way no living mouth should ever be. Someone slaps his chest. Someone else curses God for making pearls round enough to roll and expensive enough to justify all this. No use. They wrap the body. By sunset, the Tao is moving again. That is how the sea teaches economics. Morning is real, but the season is short. You ask your father that night if the dead diver's family will at least be free of debt now. He looks at you for a long time, then laughs once, not because it's funny, because it's hopeless. That is when you understand the trap properly. The diver's body can stop. The account doesn't. Dead in the Gulf pearling world could survive bad seasons, transfers between captains, and long delays in payment. British era reforms in Bahrain specifically targeted indebtedness among divers and crew because it had become so entrenched. A man may belong to the sea for a season. His family can belong to the ledger much longer. At 16, your father is too weak to dive deep, so you go instead. He becomes the one who watches the rope. You become the one at the bottom. That is how poverty ages a family. Not year by year. Roll by roll. Your body learns a routine. Deep breath. Stone down. Fingers cutting at the oyster beds. Basket filling. Chest tightening. Tug. Ascent. Light exploding back into shape above you. Again. 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 The tools remain primitive because the body is cheaper than innovation. Nose clip. Finger guards. Basket. Weight. Rope. That is all the sea gives you between your life and its floor. By the end of that summer, your ears ring at night. You do not mention it. Men whose bodies pay the household rent learn early which symptoms are too expensive to speak aloud. At 18, Bahrain is still a pearl island, but the cracks are showing. The merchants talk too often and too quietly. Prices are not what they used to be. Buyers are less certain. Credit tightens. A good pearl still changes a season, but fewer seasons seem good enough anymore. The value of Bahrain's pearl exports rose sharply in the early 20th century and drew buyers from India, Paris, London, and New York. But by the 1920s, the trade was already under strain before the catastrophic collapse of the 1930s. You do not know the global market. You know your mother has started watering the stew to make it reach one more bowl. That is what world economics look like when they finally arrive in a poor house. Thinner soup. Then the collapse comes. Not in one day. That would be merciful. It comes in rumors first. Japanese cultured pearls. Cheaper pearls. Perfect pearls. Pearls that do not need your lungs. Pearls that do not need your blood in the water. Then the rumors become numbers. Then the numbers become panic. UNESCO's Bahrain Pearling Dossier describes the industry's end as sudden and catastrophic in the 1930s, driven by the development of cultured pearls in Japan. As pearling collapsed, Bahrain's old pearling districts emptied and the economy shifted. The Nakuda stopped shouting as much that season. That is when you know things are truly bad. A captain who believes in tomorrow can still afford anger. A captain who doesn't goes quiet. At 20, your father dies. Not at sea, on land, in a room that still smells of salt and rope, because he never learned how to live far from the harbor, even after the harbor stopped loving him back. His chest gives out by inches. Years of diving, hauling, debt, and underfed recovery have turned him into a man older than his age. The doctor says nothing useful. Men like your father are not mysteries. They are outcomes. Before he dies, he takes your wrist and says, "Don't let the merchant inherit your son." Not house, not name. Son, that is the clearest thing he ever gives you, because he finally understands what the industry did. It did not just harvest pearls. It harvested generations. Then oil appears, not under your feet, under the island. Bahrain became the first Gulf emirate on the Arabian side of the Gulf, where oil was discovered in 1932. The timing nearly overlapped with the collapse of pearling, and for many Bahrainis, a new petroleum economy replaced a ruined sea economy with a brutal but steadier industrial one. Men at the harbor talk about wages now, not pearls. Drilling, pipelines, refineries, regular pay. The old pearl men spit when they hear it. Then they ask where to sign. That is another lesson. When an economy breaks your back long enough, you stop asking whether the next one is just. You only ask whether it feeds your children. At 22, you leave the Dow. No ceremony, no final dive, no pearl large enough to mark the ending. You simply do not go back to sea when the season opens. Instead, you take work inland. Oil field supply first, then loading, then maintenance. The pay is ugly, the work is ugly, and the machines make no promises about beauty. That is exactly why you trust them more than the sea. Pearls at least pretended suffering could become elegance. Oil makes no such claim. It just burns. Years later, people will talk about Bahrain's pearling past with reverence. And they should. The industry shaped the island for centuries. It built Muharraq, structured whole neighborhoods, and connected Bahrain to global markets from India to Europe. But reverence edits. It remembers merchant houses, the shine of jewels, the romance of divers leaping from dhows. It forgets the torn palms, the debt books, the diver who came up blue, the boy whose summer was sold before it began. That is the trouble with heritage. It polishes what labor bled to make. You survive Bahrain's pearling age. But survive is too delicate a word. You survive the debt. You survive the boat. You survive the stone weight, the nose clip, the endless sequence of dives that teach a body to turn panic into rhythm. You survive watching men drown slowly in installments, first in water, then in accounts. You survive the collapse of an entire economy and live long enough to watch the island trade one extraction for another. You survive all of it. But the boy who thought the sea was a place? He doesn't. Debt takes him first. The market takes the rest. And that is the real history of beauty. Somebody always has to go down for it. Sometimes with a stone tied to his foot. Sometimes because his father signed a ledger. Sometimes because the whole island had no better answer. By the time pearls reached Paris, London, or Bombay, the salt had already dried on somebody else's skin. Bahrain's merchants prospered. Its fleet grew. The trade became global. And still, at the center of all that shine, there was always a boy at the rail learning how quickly a body could be converted into value. You've seen Bahrain before oil, where the sea turned lungs into profit, and debt made whole families dive. But farther north and west, another empire ran a different machine. No Dow, no pearl bed, no merchant ledger, a deportation road, a dying convoy. A desert full of people who had names yesterday, and none by the time the column reached the horizon.